China has planted 66 billion trees. That's billion with a B. While China has planted more forests through afforestation and reforestation than any other nation in the history of our world, this story gets buried by Western media. Is it incompetence on issues relating to China, or is it deliberate disinformation intended to skew the narrative about China? I'm Jason Smith in Beijing, China, and this is China on Location. In order to understand this story fully, we're going to discuss what is China actually doing today, what has it been doing over the last few decades. We're going to discuss its efforts to transform deserts into forests, and we're going to discuss why the Western media gets China so wrong. Around the world, deserts are expanding due to overgrazing and deforestation and the selling off of timber for national profits. China has also suffered from deforestation in the early half of the 20th century, with regions like the Gobi and Taklamakan encroaching on habitable land and threatening farmers' livelihoods. Sandstorms have historically affected millions, if not tens of millions of people in China, and Western media often highlights only these parts of what's going on in China. But that's only part of the story. Since 1978, when China launched its Great Green Wall project, China has planted over 66 billion trees. That's more than any nation in history and has contributed to 25% of the world's increase in green vegetation since the year 2000. China increased its own forest cover by 40% from 1990 to 2000, increasing its total forest coverage by 243,000 square miles. Over the past decade, China has restored 4.3 million hectares of desert land. That's more than the size of Denmark. This includes completing a 3,000-kilometer ring, which has encircled the Taklamakan Desert, preventing it from encroaching further on towns, small villages, and farmland. And actually, a lot of it now, and I've seen this personally, has become farmland. So people in the Taklamakan Desert, in Pishan, in Aksu Prefecture, and elsewhere are now farming on what was once desert land. Sandstorms, too, have decreased in intensity. When I arrived here more than a decade ago in Beijing, at least one sandstorm per year would come into Beijing for several days, making the skies literally turn orange. Sometimes these sandstorms would last a week or even 2 weeks, but their intensity and the duration has been reduced each year, year after year. Are there still sandstorms here in Beijing? Yes, but typically they only last a couple of days now. A lot of the sand is blowing down from Mongolia through Inner Mongolia into Beijing, but due to massive reforestation and afforestation efforts and anti-desertification efforts in Inner Mongolia and in Hebei province, the sand is less intense. China has now actually reached out to the government of Mongolia and is helping them afforest their deserts as well. So perhaps in the future, sandstorms in this part of China will be completely decimated. It's also just not about trees. It's not about communities going out and planting trees, of which I have been a part, but it's also about massive efforts to transform deserts into forests. I have been to Xinjiang, to the Taklamakan Desert 3 times, and each time I have witnessed these incredible efforts where poplars and swaswa trees have been planted, which have sought to transform deserts not just into swaswa forests, of which I have seen, but also into farmland. There are now communities in the Taklamakan Desert farming and making cash crops, which they sell on a national and international level, but also China has taught these farmers how to transform these cash crops into products with added value: dried fruits, juices, alcoholic beverages that have been grown locally. A lot of these are then sold at the national and international level online using popular platforms. And I've seen where people are trained in Xinjiang to be able to take these skills and provide more for their family. Families that were once impoverished and living in desert conditions are now prospering and living in farmland that exists in what was once the desert. In regions like Inner Mongolia, former dunes now support agriculture, boosting food security for the 1.4 billion people that live here in China. A lot of the process in the desert begins with straw. Regular straw that you grow on farmlands, hay is for horses kind of straw. And they take shovels or other machines, sometimes it's automated, and they put it down in like a grid tile formation, little pockets of straw that prevent the desert from moving. Once the desert is immobile, firstly, it can protect roads, but secondly, then you can plant plants like the swaswa tree on it, and it facilitates the growth of these trees with drip irrigation over a very relatively short period of time. And entire forest landscapes have been created in which I've walked around. And not only are those forest landscapes like holding the desert in place and providing a sanctuary for wildlife and reclaiming deserts that were once lost over the last 2 millennia, but it's also facilitating agriculture. Yes, there are huge walnut farms and huge apple farms in deserts, but there are also simple farms like tubers growing underneath the swaswa trees for local farmers. A lot of those are used in traditional Chinese medicine, and this provides additional income for locals who live in Xinjiang and Inner Mongolia and elsewhere in China, where afforestation efforts have transformed the landscape. When looking at the context of what China is doing all over the country, it shows the level of commitment because there are wetland preservations going on in China like you would not believe. There's been the mobilization of millions of people, but also immense investment in technology like aerial seeding or robotic seeding. There are robots literally right now roving the deserts of China, and they are planting seeds in the desert in the hopes that these seeds will take off and provide more forestation. They are protecting mountain landscapes. China is making new entire forests. The Swaswa forest that I have mentioned and the other forests that I have seen in Inner Mongolia and elsewhere are immense. You can drive through them on the roads for hours and hours and hours without end. But that's not all that's going on. In addition to afforestation, the creating of new forests where formerly forests did not exist, there's a lot of reforestation as well. In recent developments, China is using drought-resistant algae to create entire new farmland. And these farmlands are actually yielding enormous results. And I guarantee over the next few years, we'll see this expand across deserts in China. Barren lands transformed into farmlands. This is going to provide the food security that China needs, but these technologies and these techniques, they can be exported to other places, to Africa, to Central Asia, to other countries where there are currently barren lands that are potentially farmlands, which can provide food for not just millions or tens of millions of people. Potentially billions of people could benefit from China's innovations. This isn't just something that I observe or other people in Chinese media or Chinese bloggers observe on the ground in China, but this has been observed by NASA and confirmed from space as well. So why is there a disconnect between the whole story, what's really going on in China, and the way that Western media report on China? Now, maybe some of that is ill intent, but not all of it. Most Western reporters who are reporting on China are simply not based in China. Even the ones that are based in China are in peripheral cities like Hong Kong and very rarely come into China's mainland. So it's impossible for them to really go out and explore China and see what's going on like I'm able to. If you want to read news about what's going on in China, why would you read news that's written in France or written in Germany or written in the United States? Most of those reporters really have very little idea what's actually happening in China. So consider reading CGTN, China Global Television Network. They also have online periodicals. You can go to their website, cgtn.com, or the Global Times, globaltimes.cn, or China Daily, or one of many other news periodicals that come out daily in China. In addition to this podcast, you can find out what's happening in China from Chinese sources. Because often, and I would say most often, the reporting in the West about China is barely accurate at all. And they're missing a huge amount of the field of what's actually going on and the complex nuance of what's developing in China. A balanced view grounded in the data shows that's what's really happening in China in afforestation, reforestation efforts. China is a global champion of afforestation and reforestation, and its efforts are already being replicated in other countries, like Mongolia, like in many countries in Africa, where the techniques that are being used in China are already being tried in other parts of the world. What does the data actually show? It shows that China has planted more trees than any nation in the history of our world. 66 billion trees. From my on-the-ground view, going out and participating in actual tree plantings, because this is a cultural phenomenon. These are not just workers going to the desert, although some of them are. Some of them are actually just local communities that are committed to tree planting efforts. At least 2 or 3 times a year, I'm invited to a tree planting. And a lot of the people that I know around me, they also go to these tree plantings. We go to somewhere that's a little bit barren that, the government has facilitated or some person has facilitated and said, this is just barren land. Why don't you plant trees here? And we go out with shovels and buckets of water and seeds or saplings, and we plant trees. This is something that I've been doing year after year, and it's not just me. There's a Chinese cultural phenomenon. There's even a tree planting day. And every year, the president of China, President Xi Jinping, goes out and plants trees with kids. Oftentimes, I've also gone to goodwill events where American students, for example, have come to China to explore China with their university professors and such. And one of the events that gets arranged is a tree planting. So we go out and we plant trees with university students from the United States. They're always thrilled to participate. This is something that people around the world can get behind. People around the world want there to be more trees, want there to be more carbon capture. This is the most advanced technology in the world for capturing carbon. Trees. So, this is something you can do wherever you are. And if you come to China, I guarantee you, if you live in China long enough, you'll have the opportunity to go out and plant trees with your community as well. If there's one key takeaway beyond Western media's inability to understand what's actually happening in China, it's that China is doing what it takes as a leader to facilitate afforestation, reforestation, and planting trees. And these techniques and the attitude that it takes to implement this can be transplanted elsewhere. If you want the truth about China from someone who actually lives in China, subscribe to China on Location. I'm Jason Smith from Beijing, China.